What's up YouTube, Capital G here, talking about the brand new OCG Errata on the card Prohibition. This was very unexpected and I also think kind of unnecessary, but Konami went ahead and did this. Want to give my 2 cents on Erratas as a whole and then also give my opinions and thoughts on Prohibition in the competitive meta or its competitive applications, because the functionality of this new Prohibition has actually been drastically changed from the old Prohibition. Like it definitely works differently in a couple of key matchups where this card is kind of useless, where it used to be able to quite dominate. So for starters, I'm not a fan of erratas. I understand that sometimes Konami deems them absolutely necessary because cards are like printed wrong, where I can go with an old school one like Bazoo the Soul Eater. Originally when that card was printed, Konami said, or it said on the text of the card, that you could just banish 3 cards from your graveyard. I believe Skull Layer was the same exact thing. They both got errata to say that you had to banish monsters. I understand those type of erratas. Those are cards just being misprinted. It's not the original intent of Konami to have the card work that way. So those are absolutely necessary. I even understand when Konami erratas like ban cards because they feel like they can't bring them back to the game ever. Chaos Emperor Dragon, even though we have not got that errata, would be a perfect example. There's really no condoning that card ever coming back unless you heavily errata it. And sometimes you guys know the spirit of the card is lost or the card is absolutely ruined. For instance, I think Brain Control and Sinister Serpent, you looked at Sinister Serpent, at least I did immediately, and I said, oh my goodness, this card is absolutely trash. It's ruined, it's garbage. And it turned out that, yeah, that came to fruition. It is pretty much a terrible card. But then sometimes Konami actually finds a happy medium. Look at Future Fusion and Ring of Destruction. Not quite as good as they were before, but still very playable. And they actually have seen competitive play in like YCS topping decks. So sometimes Konami gets it right, sometimes they get it wrong. Prohibition is a little bit of a different example. It's a card that's already legal, and they're not really like changing it because it was printed in an error. They're actually just giving us a little more clarification, and sometimes that's fine, but sometimes you guys know that they kind of change how cards work, and I don't necessarily agree with that. It makes it a little more confusing, to be honest, especially when you have like really old school cards. This is where I start getting errata, PSTD, especially if you're an old school player like me. There are a couple of cards you can think of off the top of your head. Call of the Haunted, Necro Valley, Prohibition is another one. A lot of these cards are now on their like 6th and 7th erratas, and it's kind of hard from year to year to even remember what they do. My opponent activated Necro Valley on one of my live streams, and I was like, wait, what does that card even do anymore? Because it's been errated like 7 times. So yeah, sometimes it can be confusing, and I understand that it can also be confusing when Konami erratas the ban cards, but the difference is if you've been out of the game for like a year and a half maybe, or let's say you've been out of the game for like 2 years, if you're like, oh wow, Future Fusion is playable again, chances are people, the first thing they're going to say is, yeah, but it got errata. Like you're going to know kind of instantly when another card gets errated that maybe didn't need an errata, or the errata changes the card differently. It might be a long time before you find out that Necro Valley works completely differently, or it has this other effect that it didn't used to have before. So I don't know, to me that is actually something that is just, it's a pet peeve of mine, and it's just kind of annoying. But let's go ahead and actually talk about Prohibition and what this card does and how it actually is quite different than the old Prohibition. So the new Prohibition text, and actually before I do that, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to say, well, Cap G, who even cares? This is the OCG. Well, the thing is, we eventually do get these OCG cards. Chaos Emperor Dragon is kind of an exception because that is a ban card, but if you look at like the latest Necro Valley updates, well, when Konami errated that, we eventually got that one. If you look at even Grand Soil, Konami has already came out and officially announced that Grand Soil is going to be getting errated in the TCG. So short of Chaos Emperor Dragon, these erratas always do make their way to the TCG. So I believe that we're definitely going to get this one. But let's go ahead and break down the card. Prohibition, continuous spell, none of that is, nothing's changed there. It says you can activate this effect by declaring one card name. Okay, apply these effects to all cards whose original name is the card name you declared. This does not apply to cards that are already on the field before this effect started applying. So if a card's already on the field, it's kind of, it's unaffected by Prohibition. I believe that that's how it always worked, but don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure at one point anyways it was. It says that they cannot be placed on the field, they cannot be activated, nor can their effects be activated or applied. They cannot be summoned or set. That's a very big one. Your opponent can't set them or summon that card if it happens to be a monster that you called. It also says they cannot attack, nor can they change their battle positions. I believe that that was already in the effect of like an older version of Prohibition. This one is also, I believe, or this one is new, I believe. It says they cannot be used as material for special summon, or excuse me, for a special summon that requires materials. Konami actually then went ahead and they elaborated in further detail. It just says, like your opponent can't use it for like an Exceed summon, a Link summon, a Synchro summon, a Ritual summon, etc., etc. You guys get the basic thing, or you guys get the special summoning conditions, essentially. Now, most people might look at Prohibition and they might say, well, the card kind of seems like it works the same, but there is actually one major change to the card that I identified immediately, and it made Prohibition actually significantly weaker in certain matchups. And it's the part that says, apply these effects to cards whose original name is the card name you declared. That's very important because it only affects cards that have the original name. And I'll give you guys probably the first example that you're thinking of if you're thinking about competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And that would be a deck like Spiral. So some of you guys might actually know that Prohibition was actually a common side used against Spirals if you happen to be going first. You could Prohibition, you could call Spiral Super Agents, and then your opponent could not only, not really use their Super Agent, but then other cards that count as Super Agent on the field would also be affected. They would not be able to attack. They would also be, unable to use their monster effects. This would include cards like Spiral Double Helix. Also, Spiral Tough becomes Super Agent on the field. It was kind of a way to shut down basically all of their power plays. Dark Magician is actually in a very similar situation. Obviously, if you activate Prohibition in the past and you used to call Dark Magician, your opponent couldn't summon any copies of Dark Magician. They also could not summon, or their Magician of Dark Illusion on the field would not be able to activate its effect. I mean, they could summon it, but it basically wouldn't be able to attack. They wouldn't be able to do much of anything with it. Same thing goes for the Dark Magician Dragon Knight. That's another one that would kind of be hurt by the old Prohibition. Cyber Dragons are in a very similar situation. There's like Proto Cyber Dragon, Cyber Dragon Dre. So there are archetypes out there where multiple monsters become different monsters while on the field, and a lot of times that monster that they become is kind of the core of the deck. Spiral Super Agent, Dark Magician, Cyber Dragon, and the new Prohibition really, it really hurts that. Now, I do understand that Konami is giving a little more utility. They're saying, hey, you can't even, use it from your hand. Let's just say you're playing Spiral Shadows. That means that you can't use that Super Agent for the fusion summon of like a random Shadow monster or something like that. They're essentially saying that you can't do anything with that monster unless it was already on the field before Prohibition was actually activated. But to me, I just don't understand why they needed to make more clarifications on the card, or why this errata was even necessary. It actually, in my opinion, makes Prohibition significantly worse, because if there is going to be a future deck that is, I don't know, maybe designed very similar to Spirals, where multiple monsters in the deck are kind of like one monster, well, now we just lost an excellent counter to said deck. This card would have been excellent in the side deck, but now I'm looking at the utility lost from Prohibition, and I'm wondering if it ever is going to be relevant again while it has this current card text. Because to me, now you're basically citing Prohibition in against an archetype or a deck that is so heavily reliant on one specific card, and you're never going to get any type of dual utility. You're never going to be able to, as before, shut down multiple cards in your opponent's opponent's deck where it's like, yeah, half of their normal summons like Spiral, I mean, you're basically going to be stopping those cards, or they're just not going to be that useful. And I don't know, I'm a little disappointed by this Prohibition Errata. I felt it was unnecessary, and I don't really think that the card is that good anymore. So you guys let me know in the description below, do you guys like erratas in general? Do you feel like they should be used as I do, only if they're absolutely necessary? Are you fine with ban cards kind of like getting errata so Konami can bring them back in the game? Or are you just like, you know, keep it banned and keep the spirit of the card? But I really don't like when Konami erratas a card multiple times, a la Call of the Haunted, Necro Valley, Prohibition, because I feel like a lot of times the cards end up doing completely different things and end up being different cards. Look at Necro Valley, for example. Like, that card has changed so many times, like now it's almost a different card from when they first printed it. Yeah, whatever you guys think, leave it in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching as always. Hopefully we don't get this for a while, because Prohibition is like still pretty decent against certain matchups. But yeah, when we get this, I feel like the card actually becomes kind of crappy. So yeah, thank you guys for watching as always. Subscribe if you have not already. Turn on that notification bell for daily videos.